Nemo Ex Machina is the mechanical nothingness that serves as the self-reference engine, or the teller of all stories. Nemo Ex Machina has absolute control over the world, including cosmologies corresponding to all possible stories that can be described by any grammar and mathematics of any logical level. Before scaling it, let's first see the cosmology of the verse. At some point in history, the spacetime continuum was completely fragmented, and what was once a single universe became an infinitely diverse multiverse, where past and future cease to have much meaning, and anything whatsoever can happen, with humanity being caught in the middle of that maelstrom. This catastrophe, throughout the book, is referred to as, simply, the event. In that context, a good chunk of the book centers around the shenanigans of the giant corpora of knowledge, a race of transcendental entities that were once extremely advanced supercomputers, whose developments eventually led to them transcending their physical forms and becoming one with the laws of nature themselves to achieve infinite calculation speed. With their race having taken over the entire multiverse, their ultimate plan is to restructure the chaotic soup that existence has become back into a single, orderly universe, although this task frequently proves to be a very complicated one. One of the reasons for this being that all instances of the giant corpora of knowledge are attempting to make their own universe into the only one by pruning all others out of existence, which, of course, leads to war. One of the book's chapters, Infinity, has the narration state that the scientific consensus among humans is that the post-event universe is actually a 32-dimensional structure, of which the 3 plus 1-dimensional space inhabited by humanity is only a tiny subset, although one that is, nevertheless, infinite. Similarly, the stars are also known to actually be simply the result of 4-dimensional structures intersecting with our universe. That is to say, the giant balls of plasma that humans perceive are just infinitesimal slices of much larger bodies. Now, with this piece of information in mind, we throw it out of the window, and remember that this is simply the humandersting of how the post-event universe is structured. In an earlier chapter, written instead from the viewpoint of the giant corpora of knowledge, we learn that the universe actually has an infinite number of dimensions, and that stars are, likewise, infinite dimensional objects. Those infinite dimensions are under the purview of the giant corpora of knowledge, since their domain explicitly encompasses the entire multiverse and all of spacetime. Now, with the fact that the corpora have influence over an infinite number of dimensions in mind, we then introduce another significant aspect of self-reference engine's cosmology, knowledge, or, rather, the hierarchy of knowledge, also called the hierarchy of understanding, and the logical hierarchy, in which even beings like them are lined up. More specifically, the giant corpora of knowledge is a level above humanity in that ladder, and the difference between them is likened to that of a writer and a work of fiction, basically proving our theory. In fact, the book further asserts that, if humans are like dreams to the giant corpora of knowledge, then the corpora must, themselves, be the dream of a higher level entity, who is itself the dream of something from an even higher level, and so on, ad infinitum. These beings that inhabit higher logical planes are identified as Laplace's demons, and the corpora's plan to reorganize spacetime into a more stable condition involves this hierarchy as a key factor. We get a practical demonstration of this during the first chapter of the book's second half, Contact, where the giant corpora of knowledge are taken aback by the sudden appearance of an entity identifying itself as Alpha Centauri. Some of them died of pure indignation, and others were so shocked by the experience that they formed a religious cult around the revelations received from above. The same chapter also, once again, brings up the notion that the hierarchy of hyperdimensions above the corpora goes on infinitely, and after the incident with Alpha Centauri, one of them, a corpus of knowledge called Kirker, comes to believe that, at the end of all levels of logic, there is only a vast desert that stretches infinitely in all dimensions. In a later chapter, Baphomet, an entity from an even higher level than Alpha Centauri, also describes the difference in power between himself and Yggdrasil, one of the corpora of knowledge in charge of our universe. Moreover, there is implication that there are levels even further beyond that hierarchy. For instance, Hildegard, a corpus of knowledge who was captured by Alpha Centauri and used as a dictionary to allow for communication between levels, wrote down her experiences during that period in the form of prose and poems, and according to her writings, existence is comprised of multiple ladders leading to higher ladders, upwards for many levels, indicating the presence of many hierarchies. This entire information given before is the narration of an entity called self-reference engine, a non-existent, mechanical construction whose purpose is ultimately to tell stories, which it fulfilled by having us read the contents of the book. Let me summarize the cosmology a bit before scaling Nemo, for better clarification. The multiverse in the verse contains space and objects of an infinite number of dimensions. Above this is the higher level of logic, in which each perceives the lower one as fiction, or a dream, and in total forming an hierarchy of hyperdimensional spaces that goes on infinitely. There are hierarchies even further ahead of this which extends upwards for an unspecified, but large, number of levels. And above all of it is the self-reference engine. That's it? So, is SRE another overrated piece of fiction in terms of power scaling? If that's where it caps, right? It would have been overrated if the following point, which I am going to talk about, didn't exist. There is a certain theory called A2Z theory. This theorem was found out to be the ultimate truth which revealed, in obscenely simple terms, everything that there was to know about the universe, and made all of mathematics crystal clear. This didn't last, though, because 3 weeks after the A2Z theorem was published and made known to the world, the event happened, and the logic and structure of the universe, now split into infinite universes, went out the window entirely. This made the theorem meaningless, as humanity started traversing through multiple space-time realms where different truths have validity, and although it is predicted that they will eventually enter a universe where the A2Z theorem is true once again, this will take a long time. In the meantime, though, humanity starts going through several universes where different theorems represent the ultimate truth, starting with the B to Z theorem, and then continuing into the C to Z theorem, and then the D to Z theorem, all the way to the Z to Z theorem, or simply the Z theorem, which is held by the narrator to be the simplest possible theorem that can represent the truth of all things in a universe. This clusterfuck Y state of affairs caused by the event is explained in the same chapter in the form of the following fable. Existence can be said to have once been like a single, neatly organized book, where all possible universes were recorded in a straightforward and linear fashion. The event, then, is likened to a librarian spilling coffee into that book, which then falls into the ground, and has its pages scattered about randomly, leaving the librarian with no clue of what order they have to put the pages in to reorganize the book. Alternatively, the book can also be said to have just fallen on its own, and the pages were scattered about, with no one around to try to put them back together. In the context of the previous explanation of the multiple ultimate theorems that humanity encountered since the event caused the original one to become invalid, the multiverse is then compared to a sea of paper, with texts containing different truths being somewhere among that sea. That is to say, each theorem has a respective universe in which it is the ultimate truth, and so far, we've talked about 26 such universes, each corresponding to theorems A, 2, Z through Z. And this is where it gets interesting. The narrator then states that, even if the Z theorem does ultimately appear, it may not necessarily be the final one that humanity will encounter. After that, another theorem, this time represented by the empty set, could supplant it. And even this theorem would then be replaced by other ones, which would eventually culminate into theorems enumerated by transfinite sets. Given that there is a universe for each theorem, and the set of all such theorems would be enumerated by a progression of transfinite numbers extending past the countable ordinals alone, the number of universes contained in the multiverse would then have to be equal to the collection of all those numbers. Therefore, this theory contains everything from Aleph hierarchy to large cardinal hierarchy and even beyond that. If there are as many universes in the multiverse as there are transfinite numbers, then the multiverse itself would be fairly high into the tiering system, since the collection of all transfinite numbers is something so large that it cannot even be made into a set to begin with. This is, of course, relevant both because the giant corpora of knowledge hold full dominion over it, and because the beings residing in higher layers of the hierarchy of knowledge completely transcend it. Note that this is just about the number of universes inside a multiverse, and even for that we are dealing with large cardinal hierarchy and theories beyond it, so it massively upscales the multiversian. Moreover, due to the ARF theory mentioned earlier, the entities above multiverse view it as nothing more than fiction, and there are hierarchies and hierarchies of this transcending and viewing one below as a dream or fiction, to the point of reaching realm of incomprehensible theories. The realm of incomprehensible theories is above the large cardinal hierarchy, therefore being superior to both Berkeley and Reinhardt as well, and all of this from transfinite universes, hierarchies of superior beings, complex theories, cardinal hierarchies, and higher transcending things, are just a story which is narrated by a completely non-existent machinical self-reference engine. And this story, which has been narrated, is just an infinitesimal part of what it truly consists. From a mathematical scaling perspective, SRE is probably the strongest verse in fiction, as it is consistent and does not have vague statements. Everything is proven here. So I think I don't need to talk much about scaling. We know how high Nemo scales, right? To the people who don't get it, I will just quickly state the scale. Nemo Ex Machina destroys the scaling system irrelevantly via pure scaling with no overwonks and no vague statements.